Well, I suppose everyone has arrived and we can actually start. As per the tradition that we are supposed to invoke the blessings of Almighty, there is also another tradition that we follow, particularly in the Indian custom. It's the habit of welcoming our guests. Since we have taken the task of being the host, now we would like to propose a welcome. And I again request Professor Mazar Hussain to come and deliver the welcome address. Professor?
Yes, sir. And I wish everyone here a pleasant and cheerful evening. I am truly happy to among the company of many well-learned scholars on this day. The practice of welcoming has been an internal part of our culture and personal good nature. Hence, I would like to take a small moment to welcome this good and scholarly gathering to the conference organized by our institution and the Cape Comorin Trust. I would like to state to you that I feel particularly honored to welcome our most beloved and versatile principal, Dr. R. Meghanathan, for honoring us with his presence. I welcome you, sir. I am equally much delighted to have the presence of the most officious and highly efficient Vice Principal, Dr. Voice Aisha. Welcome, madam. I should say we are of IQC coordinator and advisor, Dr. to this program. Welcome, sir. Next, I welcome all the professors who have accepted our invitation to be the chairpersons in this conference. I'm most happy to welcome you all. I also take immense pleasure in welcoming our talented, our ever supportive head of the department, Dr. M. Kalai Nadial, for her tirelessly efforts and excellent supervision in organizing this event. I welcome you, madam. I extend my warm welcome to all the participants who have brought forth the intellect of their minds and cultured ideals in presenting us with a sample of their intelligence. I heartily welcome you all. Finally, I welcome all the good and efficient staff of the English department who relentlessly efforts has aided in conducting this memorable event. I welcome you all and wish all the participants of this faculty development program good luck. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Professor. And now, let us, without further ado, let us move on to the main event of our auspicious occasion, I should say. First of all, I wish everyone present in the scholarly gathering a very sweet and a very lovely evening. To state you the truth, I have to declare something. I feel highly elated right now. I feel really highly elated because I do realize that I am in the company of such great learned and scholarly gathering, and where some remarkable men have come, remarkable academicians have come. So on this wonderful evening, I have been commissioned with a task that I really enjoy at this particular moment. I've been commissioned. I've been given this task of introducing the first resource person of our fabulous series of great presentations. I thank Dr. Kalaina Diyal, our head of the department, for giving me this wonderful opportunity to give this introduction to this our first resource person. And I'm very much particularly happy to introduce this great person because his excellence. When I read his credentials, it was mind blowing because his excellence actually precedes everything, like precedes even his own presence. I am very much happy to introduce Dr. Michael Barron from the wonderful land of Australia. Dr. Michael Barron, good evening, sir. And kindly allow me to give a small introduction about your good self to all the participants here. Dr. Michael Barron has seen and he has been actively involved in this wide field of this project management and strategy consulting for the past 20 years. Can you believe that? He also has some experience in managing it, and also he has great expertise in developing and delivering both postgraduate and undergraduate university programs. This is just his profession. There's something else coming up. There's an amazing side for this great person. He's also a great writer. You see, he has authored many books and lots and lots of articles, really beneficial articles, which covers a wide range of business, technology, higher education, and educational policy related fields. And all these books, they are actually published, and they're published not only in Australia, they're also published and widely read in countries like Singapore, China, Russia, Germany, UK, and God knows what else is yet to come. He has been offering part of his wide knowledge by means of lecturing many MBA and MIS students, and at some of the most prominent Australian universities. Here is something we should learn about him. Something, something very remarkable here. Actually, in 2013, some of the students from the Charles Sturt University, I hope I do pronounce the name correct, sir, from the Charles Sturt University, by the students, they actually voted him as the #1 lecturer, and he had been close to become one of the top 10 Australian lecturers. Something I hope it isn't far away from his grasp, I suppose. In 2003, he has founded the Barron Consulting Services, which is one of Australia's leading business consulting and training agencies in the field of digital transformation. At present, this consulting and training services are available at Melbourne, Sydney, and they're in Australia, as well as in China, Singapore, and New Zealand. And so, dear professors and academicians who all gathered here, I present you Dr. Michael Barron. Dr. Michael Barron, sir, I kindly seek your permission to state a small opinion of mine. That is, I humbly state that we are very much assured and we are eagerly looking forward to that eminent day when your good name finds a noteworthy place in the top 10 Australian lecturers. That day isn't far away, sir. And that day, it's not you, sir, but that category of this top 10 lecturers, that will be praised because that would have included your name. We are waiting for the day, sir. I kindly ask your good self to take over this digital dais, sir. The arena is yours.
Thank you so much for such a truly warm introduction. I really appreciate it. And as far as making the list of top 10 Australian lecturers is concerned, because I missed by a small margin, students kept on teasing me about it, reminding me how close I am, and that I shouldn't complain that I haven't made the list, because whenever they're close to high distinction, I tell them, listen, you got close, there is always next time. So that was a good reason for them to tease me. Also, very happy to be in India, even on a virtual trip. Before COVID, before the pandemics, I've been traveling quite a lot. Unfortunately, recently, it's more or less the virtual travel around the world that I'm engaged in. And of course, in the light of COVID, Australia, my country, has become famous for all the wrong reasons. These days, we're famous for being one of the lockdown and curfew capitals of the world. So this is rather disappointing. But of course, we are going to work hard. We're going to try to improve our image worldwide. So today I will try to be a good ambassador for my country. And of course, I should mention that here in Australia, a large share of academics are hailing from India, and that includes some of the most prominent academic thinkers that we currently have in the country. So connection between the two countries is very, very close, very, very tight, and it's going from strength to strength. Now, I would like to talk about the work I've been doing. The work I've been doing in the field of establishing ethical standards for working with big data. And all the feedback, all the questions that I may get, I'll be really appreciative of, because it's work in progress. And of course, with ethical issues, they never close. They're always work in progress indeed. So hopefully my screen sharing has started, because I'm not a very frequent user of Google, usually present on other mediums. So hopefully I'm fine with the screen sharing. The topic of the discussion is big data collection, processing, storage, management, and ethical issues that we're facing when dealing with big data. Now, just a bit of self-introduction, even though I feel a bit odd doing it now that I received such a warm introduction from the host. I have been involved in DataWorks for over 20 years. Somebody pointed out to me that I shouldn't mention it too often because it reminds people of my age, but it also reminds many of how long the data management issues have actually been around for. So ever since technology started turning over a new leaf and the internet systems came into place, the big data challenge started occurring over and over again and becoming more and more critical. So just a bit of an intro to big data, because as far as I understand, not everyone has been exposed to the data environment. So in a nutshell, big data refers to data, to information, to sources, to files that are large and complex, to sources and files that come in different format. And it is very important for us to be able to bring these files, these formats into standard. This is really essential. So for instance, when we have a number of hospitals, they all collect medical data. And if we want to work with the data in a combined way, we need to bring it to common denominator. We need to find a way to integrate the data sets. Now, why so many ethical issues are coming out of it? The reason is very trivial. When data comes in many formats, it's hard for us to organize the data. It's hard for us to manage the data. And on many instances, organizations and universities in particular really struggled to understand the implications of working within complex data environments. And yes, one of the reasons for this has been online learning. With online learning, suddenly, a lot of processes had to be moved online. A lot of communications with students had to be moved online. Many privacy concepts, many concepts of ethical behavior towards the students, many concepts in relation to ethical conduct of the classes, when we have only partial information about the audience, they had to be reviewed. So with 5 V's of big data: volume, velocity, variety, variability, and value, we have to somehow find ways to establish ethical standards for each, and ethical standards for dealing with those in a combined manner. So some of the areas where big data is particularly open to ethical problems. One, when data is unstructured, when data is unclassified, when data is coming from sources that are sometimes not able to organize the data sets well. So giving example of universities working with the student data, or even at micro level, us as lecturers, understanding the students, understanding what data is to be shared, what data is not to be shared, why particular student cohorts are finding it uncomfortable to discuss certain matters. In the past, in the face-to-face environment, I knew my students. Some I knew better, some I didn't happen to know so well. But still, if I wanted to know more, if I had any concerns, if I was worried about mistreating them or them being mistreated by a member of my teaching team, I could always reach out easily and have a face-to-face talk. Today, it's more complicated. I don't have such intimate knowledge of the student cohorts. So applying the big data sources to the university environment, this range of sources concept, we don't really know where the students are from. We don't know what kind of people they are. Likewise with their data, we're not very clear whether the data can be trusted or not, whether it's sensitive or not, whether students, whether other stakeholders understand the importance of data privacy. And of course, data ownership arrangements, intellectual property, working within an environment where we're dealing with intellectual property laws and regulations from all over the world. Here in Australia, we have certain laws that are dealing with intellectual property. They are fairly different from the ones in European Union countries. Likewise, as far as India or China are concerned, as far as United States are concerned, there's totally different rules and regulations. And those arrangements are sometimes very hard for us to understand. They're equally hard to understand for all the stakeholders. For example, as a researcher who has research students under me that are all over the globe, I need to make sure that as a project lead, I install ethical values and I ensure ethical behavior among all of them. So I'm responsible not only for ethical behavior of my own, but also ethical behavior by the students. Whatever projects we're doing, there is collective responsibility. There is also my personal responsibility. But then again, there is one core difference between legal and ethical issues that makes it so difficult. The difference is legal issues can always be resolved, can always be linked to established legal framework. Complexity is limited to and by laws. So as far as legalities are concerned, they can always be discussed, they can always be negotiated, they can always be confirmed. If it's ethical treatment, for instance, of academic work, if it's ethical treatment of data, we can always refer to the laws, rules, and regulations of different countries, myself and the students and other members of the academic team are hailing from. This is for the legal issues. For the ethical issues, there is often no right or wrong. There are often scenarios where it's very hard to establish what is the right discourse of behavior to undertake. So many are not clear. And even if you feel like you are clear, how do you impose those standards on others? Legally, you cannot. I can give you a couple of interesting examples of ethical issues in relation to big data. In Australian universities, when you work with student files contain personal information on the students. And some of the data fields they are not to be legally shared outside the admin team. But there are some other data fields, and sharing this information does not legally invade people's privacy. However, there are ethical considerations, and it's obviously not a good idea to display student profiles in front of the class. If you're a lecturer, you wouldn't display student profiles in front of the class simply because some students may not find themselves comfortable. Now, from ethical perspective, we can have a discussion, because you can, and actually had a chat about this with my students, because others are perfectly fine with it. For instance, with my big data students, those are the students who are doing the technical course, big data management. I didn't share any data with them, obviously. I just asked them a question. I asked them, okay, ladies and gentlemen, consider this. Your student profiles are displayed publicly. Would you mind? And some of the students said, Michael, what is the ethical issue? That's not a big deal. People can ask me whatever they want to ask me anyway. I'll tell them. There's nothing particular about it. There's nothing I would like to hide. Some of the female students said, sorry, I don't like it. I wouldn't want my age, for instance, publicly displayed. I don't want people to know what my age is. I feel like I look much younger than my age. This is something I would like to keep private. Some people said, look, I don't want my employment status shared. In other words, we're having a scenario where some people are actually not seeing an ethical issue at all, because when they apply it to themselves, to people around them, to environment they're within, it's totally fine. They're happy to share the information. They don't see it as something that invades their privacy. They don't have an ethical dilemma. Others feel they could be personally affected. There's also people who feel like personally they're fine, but they have appreciation of the fact that people around them may be affected. So with ethical issues, in other words, it's very, very hard to resolve those. And this is why they remain ongoing. They remain ongoing simply because how can you resolve an issue that doesn't have a legal resolution? An issue where one group of people cannot order the other group of people to behave in a particular way. I can give you an example outside the big data field, which shows how absurd, as far as I'm personally concerned, the ethical issues may get. A while ago, there was a letter published in one of the leading Australian newspapers. And it should be pointed out that in Australia, when a letter is published by newspapers, the letter is accompanied by full name of a person who is writing it and a place he is living in. So this is letters to the editor section. Letter was written by a lady who was complaining about people around her not being sensitive and supportive enough when she was heavily pregnant and traveling on the train. And there are designated areas where seats are to be offered to her on request. There are also other parts of the train where people don't have to offer a seat. However, she felt like it was very bad that nobody offered her a seat. She was complaining about it. And when I saw the letter, the first thing that comes to mind, how horrible it is. How horrible it is that nobody offered her a seat. She's 7 months pregnant. She's on the train. Nobody bothers to offer her a seat. In my eyes, it is horrible kind of behavior. It is behavior which is totally unacceptable. It is behavior that people should be ashamed of. But then I started reading through responses to the letter. Some other letters that were sent in response to hers. Majority of the people were writing in support of her. They were emphasizing the importance of everybody being more understanding and more supportive. But there were also other people who were replying in a very strange way. Somebody replied by saying, I paid for my ticket, I got there first, I'm entitled to have the seat. Another person replied, I'm a woman myself. Pregnancy is a choice, not a disability. And one thing I would like to bring to your attention, ladies and gentlemen, when people commit some crime, when they do something illegal, they know they're doing something wrong. They're doing it for personal benefit, but they're not going to publicize it. In this case, people were writing to the newspaper with their name and address supplied, saying that I wouldn't offer a pregnant lady a seat, which shows that not only there's, in my personal view, something wrong with their mindset, but also they sincerely believe it's nothing wrong. There's no legal way to punish them. There's no legal way to enforce certain behavior by them. And that highlights some of the problems with ethical issues. How do we really resolve those issues? Now, going back to big data environment, it's highly complex data environment. We're dealing with a lot of controversial scenarios. Should data be shared? Should it be kept private? When can data be shared? And with all of those complex scenarios emerging, there are people with different mindsets, with different feelings, with different stands on what kind of data should be kept private, for instance. Is privacy an important value or not? Should we really bother to do it? Should ethical issues stand on the way of organizational performance? Should we even worry about them? They are not enforceable in many cases. Enforcing an ethical issue is extremely difficult, and validity of such enforcement is always going to be questioned. So that brings me to another interesting question. Can we have an ethical code of conduct? Can we say, look, there's no such laws, but people got to be nice to each other, understanding of each other's needs, considerate, respect each other's privacy, act politely and nicely towards others? Ideally, yes. But then again, the question emerges. How do we enforce those rules? How do we enforce this ethical code of conduct? And this is a very big problem, because in many cases, we cannot even agree what is essential, what is advisable, and even what is ethical. If we look at universities, and of course, universities are among those organizations who are dealing with the biggest data now, again, mostly in the light of COVID and so many classes moving online and generally education moving online. Many universities are now at a loss. What kind of code of conduct can they introduce? You can write up a code of conduct. You can request lecturers to follow this code of conduct. You can try to request students to follow. But if they don't, how do you write a perfectly neutral, unbiased code of conduct? There are always political pressures. Here in Australia, there are always pressures to do with the so-called political correctness. According to some people, there are certain sensitive areas which are promoted by the government that we should also have higher respect for as compared to other areas. Others, they feel like the focus should be on values that are more global rather than local. So this is an ongoing problem. How do we write ethical code of conduct, and how do we enforce it? How do we educate people in following it up? Because big data is complex data. It's data which is sometimes hard to manage. And of course, personally, I work with the Department of Business and Department of Information Systems. But within university environments, we have other departments where anything related with technology does scare some staff members, does scare some students. And when they're dealing with online data, when they're dealing with unclassified data, it's very hard for them to clearly understand what is the right course of action. So some of the areas that I've been advocating, despite all the challenges, and I'm a fairly strong advocate of those. One, linking ethical considerations to laws, rules, and regulations where possible. And I don't think it's that difficult, because you may argue that there are certain laws, unless we are trying to simply get people to follow the laws, how do we link ethical codes of conduct to laws? Well, sometimes we cannot link them to laws, but what about rules and regulations? For instance, in many countries, and I believe in India it's also the case, workplaces such as universities can create their own rules and regulations, own codes of conduct. So if we feel particularly strongly about certain ethical issues, we can emphasize those in our professional codes of conduct. We can ensure that we promote certain values and have some rules and regulations that, at least to a certain extent, support those ethical values that we want to hold high. This is really important. But for this, of course, we need to have at least some form of consensus, what is ethical, what is not, which is not always that easy. So this is what can be done at organizational level. Secondly, at industry level, it's really important to have industry-wide ethics policies for working with big data, particularly given complexity of big data. Now, this is where it gets very tricky. In many industries, there are already such policies. There are already industry-wide standards and codes of conduct. Insurance industry comes to mind. Banking industry comes to mind. Government, of course. In many industries, such as banking and insurance that I already mentioned, it's international standards. Many of the ethical codes of conduct are accepted internationally. Some industries, it's much harder. For instance, and this is what I find very interesting, as university academics, we always consider ourselves to be pioneers of intellectual thought. We always consider ourselves to be deep thinkers, leaders of the society, people who are moving the society forward, people who are supposed to unite organizations around the globe through our ideas, concepts, and projects. But then if we look at the university environment, how many countries are having nationwide ethics policies? How many for universities? How many universities around the globe are working towards global ethical standards? Suddenly we discover something of very paradoxic nature. On the one hand, we as university workers, we as academics, we as deep thinkers and scholars, we're claiming to be the leaders. We're claiming to be leading the nations, leading the society. At the very same time, on the other hand, we're not able to unite and establish standards that work across many organizations. So we have universities, for example, here in Australia, we have many universities which are all based in the same country, subject to the same laws, but struggling to always agree on the ethical standards, struggling to establish a set of ethical standards to implement nationwide. And this is just one country. This is just at the national level. Similar problems on a more micro kind of level, the state level. You can only imagine, and I can only imagine, that if we are to work towards global ethical standards, for instance, for education industry, for higher education industry, what sort of challenges we're going to face if we're not able to resolve this discrepancy at the national level. How can we move forward and do it internationally? But we certainly need to be doing it. we need to work towards establishment of industry-wide ethics policies for working with big data, simply because big data works are always open to a lot of potential risks to people. Privacy, to security of the data can cause a lot of financial, emotional, and societal damage. So we have to be working towards it no matter what. This is the second thing I strongly believe in. But yes, it is difficult. The third one is emphasizing transparency of data management arrangements with groups and individuals having their reputation online where questionable ethical decisions are made. In other words, using the personal responsibility card to make people more responsible. Okay, let's not be idealistic. Some people may not want to act ethically purely because they're ethical by nature, they care for others, they care for society, they care for those around them. But when we have an environment where people understand it and understand it very clearly, that unethical behavior will ruin their reputation, that others won't work with them, won't publish their papers, won't invite them to conferences, won't allow them to lead teams, because of course people with poor ethical reputation, they shouldn't be, for instance, supervising student groups, because legally they may not be breaching any laws, but students always look up to their research leaders, their project leaders, those who are guiding them as far as learning is concerned. And then if person is not able to demonstrate commitment to ethical values, how is he or she going to lead? Again, just a little disclaimer, we have to be very careful when establishing those ethical standards, because just because some people personally believe particular kind of behavior is not ethical, it doesn't mean that everybody else agrees. But if there are some common standards within the industry, within the university, within a research team, we should certainly try to promote those. This is really pivotal. This is really important. Becoming responsible and trying to encourage others around us to take this personal responsibility for ethical behavior. Otherwise, there won't be any progress, particularly with big data, because again, it's the most complex kind of data that comes in many formats that is simply requiring extra care. So one thing I would like to emphasize again, the difference between, always we need to be ethical, but the difference when working with big data is we don't have to necessarily be eager to breach the ethical standards. With big data, unless we're extra careful, there will be a lot of privacy breaches, there will be a lot of data breaches, not because we don't care, but because we don't take enough care. Not taking enough care of the data is enough to destroy the safe, secure environment. Now, just a little interesting case study of how code of ethical conduct can be introduced, or at least how to attempt to introduce code of ethical conduct. So this is a segment of a Data Science Association ethical code of conduct. The reason I selected this particular code of conduct is it is written by people who are data workers themselves. So data workers trying to establish the ethical standards for working with data. They should understand the ethical implications better than others, better than we do at universities, better than many do in government organizations. They're the data professionals. They understand what big data is all about better than anyone. So you can see some of the rules, some of the ethical values they're trying to implement. And of course, and I've been involved, one of the consultants in reviewing this code of conduct. Yes, it's not perfectly written. For instance, you can see some of the points they're making. They're not clearly ethical. They're a mix of ethical and legal issues that makes it rather confusing. However, it's really good to at least try to start talking, try to start working towards development of ethical conduct. Once we get started, once we keep the ball rolling, at least we're going to be on the right path, right? But it is going to be a very long journey. And of course, we need to understand there's often policy vacuum and often the policy conflict. One example of policy conflict that I can give you, very straightforward example that comes to mind. I'm currently engaged with a number of universities, both in Australia and overseas. For instance, if you look at my LinkedIn profile, you see that I'm currently involved proactively with 2 Australian universities, and I'm also adjunct associate professor with a Swiss business school. And naturally, when I'm working with Swiss business school, there are certain expectations placed upon me by the Swiss employer. And when I'm working in Australia, there are certain expectations, including ethical ones, placed upon me by my 2 Australian university employers. And out of those 2 Australian university employers, expectations also differ. So there is contradiction. Policies contradict one another. Sometimes what is considered to be ethical at one university is not considered to be essential at another one. And naturally, as an employee, I need to follow whatever the employer advises. I'm trying to be a good and diligent employee who is not only always acting in line with my personal ethical values, but acting in line with ethical values of my employing organization. As a consultant, ethical values of my clients. And likewise, policy vacuum, where there is just no policy for us to use as a guideline, which is another problem. We would like to have some ethical standards, but within our organization, how do we do it? You work at university, you work at the Department of Architecture. What about other departments? If you get something started at the Department of Architecture, what about the department that studies French literature? Are they going to share your approach to ethical handling of the data? You need to collaborate somehow, I guess, at least within your organization first. So there are challenges. And the main one, again, it's all coming back to one problem, lack of common ethical standards, A, in relation to big data management, and B, within our respective industry, that is education. So another dilemma is, how important are ethical issues to us? Shall we really prioritize them? There are laws after all. Shall we just say that people who do illegal things are horrible? We should make sure that law enforcement is always there, and beyond this, simply not worry. Because prioritizing ethical issues naturally means we're going to prioritize them ahead of some other goals, such as maybe greater profitability, such as maybe having an environment which requires less control, an environment which is maybe going to be more enjoyable by some because it can be less organized. Some even refer to organizations that have lesser ethical standards as open-minded organizations, a concept I truly disagree with. But then again, anything that is not illegal can be unethical and is somehow acceptable. So, what to do? We already discussed some of the rules. Now to the more technical side, with the big data, how to avoid ethical collapses. Know your data. Understand what kind of data can lead to ethical problems, what kind of data contains a lot of privacy issues if potentially released. Data management rules, make them reflective of data features and significance. Understand specific ethical risks and sensitivities. Understand the values of the people you are working with, religious, personal, community. What sort of data is particularly sensitive to them? And of course, do acknowledge and assign responsibility because managing ethical data is certainly a collective effort. Classifying big data, bringing it to common denominator, also a collective effort. And of course, one area of data management where there's a lot of ethical issues, data torturing, playing with the data to the point of getting results that you like. Unfortunately, some researchers are known for this. And then, of course, torturing the data long enough so the data confesses. In other words, misusing the data or using the data inappropriately. We need to be aware, and we need to make sure we don't allow behavior that encourages it. Now, to wrap it all up, what shall we do? What is the future direction, which will hopefully be at least investigated by those who work with big data? One, data management watchdog that focuses exclusively on ethical issues in making sure that people understand the pressures and responsibilities of working with big data. Two, which does sound a bit like a dream at this stage, establishment of common ethical standards to comply with. Common ethical standards, I'm a bit of a dreamer, maybe globally, but of course to start with at least within our respective organizations, then proceeding to the state level, to the national level, etc. And not just encouragement, but also highlighting cases of data torturing and agreeing upon at least the very, very minimal data processing and management standards to be satisfied by everyone. Otherwise, we will not be moving anywhere. Now, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate to be with you today and sharing my views on ethical handling of big data. And I am on LinkedIn. I'm always happy, of course, to hear from all and every one of you in relation to ethical standards of big data management or any other research or academic or anything else that is under the sun matters. So if there are any questions, if there's anything you would like to suggest or share or contribute to the discussion, you are most welcome. Thank you so much again.
Thank you so much, sir. So I would like to say that we actually welcome some questions, if there be any, from the part of our audience. If you have any questions regarding the professors,
Yes.
yeah, please go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I have a question. My name is Ibrahim Haruna. I'm a medical practitioner from Ghana. Dr. Michael, I have really enjoyed your presentation. This is the first time I'm having a full information on big data storing, and I'm very excited and elated to have such a rich knowledge. And you are very, very experienced as to how you do your presentation. Yeah. My first question to you is, with your research in big data storing and ethical standards, if you were to be taken as a global consultant, question one, should schools, firms, or organizations adopt a universal policy framework globally as a guideline? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question, Ibrahim. It's really a great question. Now, the trouble I have with answering this question, if the question is whether they should or not, my answer is yes, they should. But the trouble is how to make it happen. Because what I'm seeing right now, specifically in my country, and because I'm working across various nations, I can see what happens in other countries. Within one country, within Australia, we really struggle to have standards across a single industry. and not just higher education, even for schools. And schools are mostly public schools. Even for public schools, the ethical rules and regulations vary from state to state. This is within a single country. This is for schools alone. So hopefully we can move towards the national standards, and so can others. As far as international standards are concerned, that would be lovely. That would solve a lot of problems. That would solve a lot of both technical and ethical issues. But at this stage, unfortunately, it's just a dream. But Rome was not built in one day. So I think the starting point is, within our respective organizations, try to make sure that there is some common understanding what the ethical standards should be. As far as your suggestion, I am fully in support of it. Just so hard to make it happen.
Okay, thank you. My next question, question 2. As researchers, scholars on this platform, we want to find out from you, with your rich knowledge in data collection. When we are conducting our research, there's a stage where you have to, before you even do the research, you seek for ethical consideration. That is by every country's statutory organization. Every country has research statutory organization that they approve the research. What do you think should be some of the strategies that should be adopted by these statutory organizations so that research that we do could be globally seen with that international eye? Thank you.
Thank you. Another fantastic question. Now, as far as data collection is concerned, there are some positives already with establishing ethical standards in most countries, and it's not just in Australia, but in most countries. Certainly it applies to all the countries I've been involved with, such as Singapore, UK, New Zealand. If you want to start collecting data, you have to pass your project through ethics committee. Every university has an ethics committee, and you need to get approval. So for instance, if my PhD students want to start collecting data for their thesis, they cannot just go ahead and collect. They have to make a proposal. They have to fill in an ethical form. They have to attach the survey if they're going to run some survey and what kind of data they're going to collect. And university ethics committee, and it's not just based on the legal considerations alone, has to approve. And the good news is, while these forms and requirements vary from university to university, overall, the ethical standards are more or less consistent, because I've been working with those ethical approval forms across various universities. And generally when you're consulting to many clients, you have difficulty moving from client to client as far as some tasks are concerned. As far as getting ethicals form through is concerned, it's fairly streamlined. So I think part of the problem is kind of under control. The second part of the problem is we're getting approval from, and this is why your question is spot on, we're getting approval for data collection from our country's university, which is based on ethical standards and based on the laws of our country. But when we're collecting data internationally, a lot of problems may emerge, because questions that are considered to be ethical in our country may be considered to be highly unethical in another country. And likewise, the data that we're collecting here may be very sensitive internationally. I can give you an example. One example is, for instance, that in Australia, people are very comfortable stating their income. They're very comfortable stating their income. But in some countries, this information is not something that they like to share around. So we need to bear in mind, if we're collecting money internationally, for example, for a comparative analysis of economic development and prosperity around the globe, we have to understand that different people who are living in different environments, they may be assuming risks that we do not, right? That what is not so sensitive by us and gets approval here may not be so, we shouldn't be so careless about, collecting data internationally and other way around. So this, I think, is the biggest problem. Not that we're not having ethical standards for data collection, but when internationally, it's really difficult for us to understand implications coming from different countries. And then again, in many instances, what happens? We're not just collecting collecting data just in 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 countries. It's around the globe. And there's all those differences. So we have to consider writing up surveys and data storage arrangements that are globally acceptable, if you like, right? So this is what the problem is. But I think we're at least working towards resolving it as much as we can.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, assuming without admitting, everybody on this platform is your students. What can you give us at least 5 differences between ethical and legal issues? They have a thin line. As students, I'm a student, I don't know anything, I'm fresh in your classroom. What can you give me? What's the difference between the thin line between ethical and legal issues? Thank you.
Okay, now I feel like a student who has to answer the questions. Now, 5 differences. I don't think we need to go to as deeply as 5, but I can tell you what the main differences are as far as I'm concerned. One difference is legal issues are enforceable. Ethical issues are not enforceable. This is one very key difference. The second difference, which is very important between legal and ethical differences, legal and ethical issues. Legal issues are more or less unified, and legal issues have boundaries. They have geographic boundaries. They have national boundaries. Ethical issues, they have no boundaries, because ethical issues can come from a number of sources, a number of disagreements, a number of conflicts, which are very hard to document. And the third, so I think I won't be naming 5, I'll name 3. And the third difference, which is very important between ethical and legal issues, is everybody appreciates the importance of following the laws. Everybody appreciates the importance of laws. If somebody doesn't follow the laws, not knowing what the law is not an excuse. You cannot use it as an excuse, but you can always say, look, people get hurt because of my actions. I'm not a very responsible manager of the big data, but you know what? I didn't know. It's not my fault. It's another country. I was not aware that this data is sensitive in that country. So these are, in my view, 3 key differences between ethical and legal issues. But if I have to narrow it down to 1, so instead of going to 5, I'll actually narrow down 3 to 1. One key difference, one key challenge. Legal issues, legal disputes, they're resolvable. Laws can be enforced. Enforcing ethical standards, it's too difficult most of the time.
Okay, Doctor, thank you very much. My questions are all answered, and I appreciate your answers. My last request is, can you please share your email address so that some of us who want to reach you can contact you in the future for sharing of knowledge? Your email address, please.
Sure, my LinkedIn profile is on the slides now regarding sharing email address. Okay, I'll type it up now. Sorry, I'm not sure I'm not able to type. Sorry, I'm not very skilled with the Google presentations. I'm more used to Zoom. So I was just trying to type it up, but on the slides, there's my LinkedIn profile. So Dr. Michael Barron on LinkedIn. This is a very good way to reach out for me. I'm checking my LinkedIn messages daily, so could be a good way to get in touch. And my email, I'm not sure how to type it, but it's webbaron@gmail.com.
Webbaron.
Webbaron, like double B, WB, then Baron, like my surname and the noble title, is one word, webbaron@gmail.com.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Barron. That was a highly educative and informational session. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for having me over. It's true
Yes.
honor.
Will there be any other questions from the participants?
Good evening, Michael. Myself, Dr. Bayant from India. Okay, we were discussing about, am I audible? Am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah,
You're
madam.
very audible.
Okay.
We can hear
Sir,
you. Please go
you
ahead.
were talking about ethical issues in research. We have just, I think, about data collection, we have not to reveal the identity of our sample or whatever population we have in our research. There are other issues also, like plagiarism is there. It also falls under ethical issues in research. And we also here provide with affidavit that we have not plagiarized our research. Is it happening in Australia also?
It is happening around the globe, but I think this is actually a very good point that you are raising. Plagiarism is not supposed to be an ethical issue. It is supposed to be a legal issue. So in Australia, if a student, for example, legally caught plagiarizing, the student is supposed to fail the assignment or fail the course. If academic is plagiarizing, which unfortunately happens a lot as well, academic is probably going to lose the job. The reason people look at the ethical dimensions of it is very trivial. It's sometimes, particularly with academics, very hard to catch them plagiarizing, because students, when they plagiarize, they usually copy. Academics, let's face it, they simply take others' ideas and do the work with others' ideas without acknowledging it. So this is why there is an ethical dimension to it. But there are legal resolutions to many of the academic misconduct or such as plagiarism issues. Regarding the ethical side of things, I think it's very important for us as a community to understand that if somebody is doing research based on ideas of others and failing to acknowledge those who contributed to his research directly or indirectly, even if legally we cannot prove, and there is a legal dimension to it again, cannot prove misconduct, we should not be inviting such people to work with us as much as possible. But again, this is a very tricky, because it's very hard to draw a fine line between plagiarism and developing ideas of others further. This is why I always emphasize to my students, particularly to research students, that it's totally fine to work with ideas with others. This is how the science, this is how the research moves forward. We need to build upon each other's ideas. But it's absolutely essential to acknowledge those you utilize ideas from. It's absolutely essential to reference religiously, if you like, to give credit whenever you do some work, give credit to those who contributed to your work directly or indirectly. But then again, hopefully also more work will be done to develop the legal dimensions further, because at least for this, there are legal avenues to maintain the standards.